Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. I'm Ty Carr, and with me today is Jack DiMatteo and Charlie Zigman.
Hi, everybody.
And Jack's joining us by audio, so we'll be hearing him as we talk about our articles today. And as always, what we're doing is talking about current events and news, business, sometimes taxes, all from an accountant's perspective. There's 3 accountants here to have that discussion. And we're going to get into it with the following topics. 1 billion of illegal cannabis seized in LA County. What does this mean for the legal cannabis industry? A UK microchip factory in the UK is taken over by a Chinese company. Essentially, that means taken over by the Chinese government. Trucking in the marijuana industry. What to do if federal legalization comes. And finally, labor shortages in the restaurant industry. How are they going to deal with this? All right, well, excited to go through this and talk with our guys here as always. So we're kicking off today with Charlie.
All right, so I've got an article we can talk about from the New York Post. It's called LA County Authorities Seize 1 billion of weed in historic takedown. And so what's happened is that the Los Angeles County the authorities have teamed up with a couple of other local jurisdictions and have orchestrated, well, like the title said, the largest takedown of confiscation of marijuana in the country. They took 1 billion of illegally grown marijuana from a place where it is legal to produce smaller amounts and to have some in California. You know, in January 2018 is when California legalized recreational marijuana sales. But it is not legal to grow at that scale at a personal level or for production and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of what has prompted this whole takedown. They shuttered 205 illegal grow operations. It resulted in 131 arrests and netted 373,000 plants. And so I just think it's kind of an interesting business issue because on the one hand, you have people that are producing things legally there, and then you have cartels and whatnot that are also producing things illegally. And I guess from my kind of purview on this, it's interesting to think about what happens when the government takes 1 billion of illegally grown weed in a place where they would otherwise, not they, but where it would otherwise be safe to sell or legal to sell. And so I guess I want to get your guys' opinion wise on what do you think should happen to this billion in weed? I mean, should it be destroyed because it was illegally produced? Should it be used for good purposes in the sense of sold and then the money put into some kind of social justice program or something, some other kind of social need or some other idea altogether? I just want to get your guys' take on what do you think should happen in this kind of historic situation we have here.
Like, what should they do with the seized weed? Was that what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly. Like, because it's illegal and whatnot, but at the same time, like, it seems not in anyone's best interest to just destroy the entire batch. And so it's like, what should the government do with this pot of weed, so to speak?
This pot, huh? Yeah. I guess they could do like what they do with other kind of seized assets. Sometimes they could auction it off to legal purveyors, to those who have the licenses, and then let them get it and then distribute it from there. That could be one way to handle that. So yeah, I mean, it would. I mean, I think probably. Yeah, there's winners and losers in a market like this, right? Because what's interesting about the story to me is how times have changed on it, right? Like if you did this story even several years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, the seizing of all that weed would be, it'd be obvious. Oh, we just destroy it, right? Because it's just illegal, and it would have a different a different context to it. But in the context of this point, like what you said, that that cannabis otherwise is legal in California and is sold through legal distribution and through legal channels, then not only is there a different context to what do you do with the seized weed, but it also sheds light on the context of the illegal or cartel run operations as it relates to the legal market as well, right? It's like before if you think about who would be against these illegal grows and who would be cheering for the takedown of these illegal grows, it would have been, primarily advocates against cannabis, advocates against marijuana in general, or people who just were against this kind of illegal activity going on. But now you've got this other kind of party. You've got people who aren't against cannabis. You've got the legal market of cannabis, the legal sellers of cannabis, who rightfully probably are cheering the takedown of this grow as well, right? Because the black market of cannabis dilutes the market value of the legal cannabis. It's the legal cannabis channels. The people who are working in legal cannabis channels, they have to pay taxes and get through permitting, and they have a lot of overhead costs that the black market doesn't have. And so, if you're in the legal market, you probably it's good for you that these takedowns are happening, right? It's good for the legal market that the black market is getting their product seized. And so, regardless of what happens to that, to the seized weed, I'd say it's good news for the legal market that this is happening, that there's a crackdown on the illegal market. It should buoy the legal market. And then I guess if you take it a step further, there's different ramifications. That's when you talk about the winners and losers, right? It's like, well, if they were to just auction off the seized weed to those who could legally distribute it, there's the ones who have the cash flow and the ability to take that product on. They're going to win, right? Because they're going to have they're going to be flush in product and be able to sell more product they otherwise would. But the rest of the market doesn't win because they're flooding the market with more product, right? So the supply has gone up, and the overall cost or the overall market prices, you would think, are not helped by flooding the market with that extra cannabis. So I think not burning it creates winners and losers in terms of if there's some way to channel it to the legal market. It's going to create winners and losers. It's going to create winners out of those who get access to it, and losers out of everyone else who didn't have access to it. That's how I see it working.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum. I think you hit it on the head, Ty, when you talk about there. Now we've got. I think the winners in this are the people that are growing it legally, because if you have this amount of pot coming on the market illegally, I mean, they're definitely going to be the people that benefit from the fact that they destroy this. But to Charlie's point, I mean, it just seems like a god awful waste just to since it is legal, just to destroy it and not get some kind of benefit out of it some way somehow. This is kind of going to go dovetail into an article that we have later on. I mean, that's kind of the conundrum that we've got going on. The fact that this is legal in some parts of the country, legal in some context within certain states, but other grows, like in this case, it's California is a legalized state, but this here is illegal. So at some point these two worlds have to merge together. What's illegal and what isn't legal, because you're going to run into situations like this where looking at it from the outside looking in, I mean, what a god awful waste to for something that's actually legal to go ahead and just destroy $1 billion worth of this pot. So again, we talk about legalization in every state. I think this is just a symptom of the growing pains of how eventually this is going to look like nationwide. You've got a battle here going on within a state, but I just think these are going to be some of the strange things that we're going to see as this becomes more mainstream and more federalized and hopefully federalized, or maybe federalized one day. But there's as this article points out, there's still certainly quite a few disconnects in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And we'll all just kind of have to watch on, with bated breath to see how it all plays out and what it means for other similar places that have this kind of problem. So, yeah. Do you have another article we can talk about, Jack?
Yeah, this one's kind of interesting. I guess this is in the infamous buyer beware category. So communist China seizes control of a British microchip factory. Well, it's kind of interesting. People look back and they just think, well, you're doing business with another country. you're not doing business with another country. I've had clients that have operations in China, and I think people don't really realize this. It's not just doing business in China or one of the other places. When you're doing business in China, you're doing business with the Chinese government. So one of the things that they talk about a lot of times, people there's companies that hesitate to build up a lot of infrastructure in China, for fear of it just being seized one day. Now, at least in this case, there were some triggers that maybe it's not the way to do business, or you'd like to see them do business, but there are triggers in there that are written into these arrangements and agreements when you do business in China, that if you default or you do something for any other reason, they have the right to seize those assets. It further went on in the article. I guess there's some underdeveloped countries that China promises to partner with them and writes predatory loans to underwrite some of the business, and then when they go belly up, they go in there and seize things. But this almost reminds me of the old, in Cuba back in the 50s. At one point, they saw that as Las Vegas before there was a Las Vegas, or another Las Vegas, another destination to pour money into. But what they soon discovered is that communist regime took over, you run the risk of having assets seized, and there's not much you can do about it. So I think this really shouldn't come as a surprise to these companies, but kind of a curious article. I wonder what you guys thought of this article.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the concern, of course, is national security issues with, as you said, Jack, that, Chinese companies are suspected to be controlled or highly influenced by the Chinese government, that there's not a lot of separation between the two. And so, when the headline is that a UK microchip factory is taken over by a Chinese company, the implication is that the Chinese government is now over that factory. And it's and the factory, if I read right, the factory is, when we say a UK factory, we don't mean a UK factory in China. We mean a UK factory in the UK. So it is concerning, right? That particularly the implications when it comes to technology infrastructure and as it relates to national security issues. I think the reference to Cuba reminds me, the other parallel there, the reference that Jack made to Cuba is that it's rare to meet a Cuban American who is likes the Cuban government. And I find the same thing with most most Chinese Americans. It's rare for me to meet, among Chinese colleagues and friends that are happy or like the Chinese government. They are often some of the most critical and the things that, it's not good. In my community and my circle of friends, I have many Chinese in that, and they've persuaded me to be very anti CCP, very, very anti Chinese government. And so I think that, and I think it's also important to remember this point, as I'm saying it, is that my being anti-Chinese government comes from my Chinese family and colleagues and friends. So being anti-Chinese government is not the same thing as being anti-Chinese. And that's also an issue in the world today, is some of the discriminatory things, that some of the logical leaps that are made that lead to discriminatory problems. But yeah, I'm fully on the page of being anti the Chinese government.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting because it's like in business school, you're taught to do this stakeholder analysis of like who's involved in your business or who has some play in that business. And you're supposed to kind of think about all these different issues. And it's over the years, it's just been really interesting to see how difficult that is to really do, because I think that if a UK chip factory had sat down at the beginning of getting set up and said to themselves, we have to think about how the Chinese government will play into what we're doing, it would have seemed ludicrous, but it now turns out that actually that is maybe a big factor to them. And so it's just, properly identifying who has some stake in your business, whether direct or indirect, is a very difficult process. But it seems like the only way that you can identify risks like this, and I guess set your business up in a way to avoid this issue. Obviously, I don't have the answer to how to do that, but I just think it's really interesting to watch businesses try to do that, and see how it plays out.
Yeah, it's an interesting distinction that you draw there, Ty, and that is the important part. Anti-Chinese government and anti-Chinese are two exact different things, and a lot of the people have come over here to have the opportunity that they don't get in China. And the good thing is, when they're on our shores, they can be anti-Chinese government just like us. Unfortunately, being stuck in the country, it's not you're not allowed to be anti-Chinese government, and very, very interesting distinction, and that's point that out. But Charlie, what else do you have for us this week?
Yeah, so just speaking about government and kind of in line with the other articles that we talked about, I found an article in Cannabis Wire called "The Trucking Industry Looks at Cannabis Legalization and What It Means for Thousands of Drivers." And so, of course, there's growing popularity of cannabis in the U.S., and we've got companies that are involved in trucking it. Trucking as an industry is still a federally regulated thing, and so there's a committee basically to discuss what should happen in relation to the legalization of marijuana across the nation, and also about removing it as a controlled substance from the federal list of controlled substances. And so the article kind of talks about some of the finer points of that, about just truckers driving through different states in which it's legal in some places and not legal in others, and whether or not they should be tested, and kind of what are the limits of that. There was an act that they tried to put together called the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, and that failed. And they've now got a revised draft of that act that they're sort of debating. And so we're going to all kind of see how this plays out. But what they said was that the original act neglected to recognize the significant impact that removing marijuana from the schedule of controlled substances would have on highway and workplace safety. And so, yeah, I just think it's interesting. They have tests for these sorts of things, to where if a trucker is driving through a place where it is illegal, they can then test whether he has any in his system, and it may go back up to like 60 days in terms of what it picks up. But that trucker may have been in a place where it was prior, where it was legal prior. And it may be the case that trucker's not actually under the influence of anything, is just testing for it. And so I guess I wanted to kind of just open discussion about how this issue will play out, maybe what we think will happen as a compromise between these sort of two conflicting worlds of highway safety and of marijuana legalization. And so, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and just wondered if you guys had any thoughts on that topic in general.
Yeah, I don't see why it would be different than alcohol, in the sense that if it's federally legalized and we're asking, well, then, how do we deal with the fact that it's federally, it's no longer an illegal substance on the federal level, but it's still truckers. We don't want truckers to drive impaired. We don't want trucks to be driven impaired across the country. I would say we don't, alcohol is not federally illegal either, but we don't want trucks to be driven by people who are under the influence, driving under the influence, right? Trucks or anything else. So yeah, I think it should be treated in a similar fashion. And in the interim, because trucks are driving across state borders, it is still federally illegal. And so it's, I would presume they just shouldn't be doing it at all in the interim. But yeah, those are my perhaps simplistic thoughts on it.
Well, it's funny. It's if that other article was illustrating disconnects in the industry, this was illustrating disconnects in the industry on steroids. We talked about, within a state where segments of it are legal and others are illegal. Well, this is what we're talking about across state lines. It's legal here, but people start getting pinchy when you go to transport here. And we talked about this on our show a couple months ago, and we kind of featured the cannabis industry. You've got all these people out here for something that's legal, and about a third of the country right now that can't get a job because it's a conviction is showing up on their record. And they're talking about expunging records, and in an era where there's a shortage of workers, and there's probably a lot of people that need a second chance that have this a felony record due to a minor drug charge that prevents them from getting a decent job. I mean, these are some of the things that we really need to look at, and what makes sense in the long run. And again, this is just the trucking industry, but they talk about expunging records and getting people to take some of these jobs. And again, until we can get this, that's why it's really difficult to watch this industry struggle without it being federalized. And we kind of see it too as some of these cannabis industries, because banking is so highly regulated, and that it's difficult for them to get a decent banking relationship. And if they do, they get charged an arm and a leg just to have a bank. If it was something, because banks are supervised, a lot of them, a lot of federal regulations with them. So again, this is just another illustration of until we get this streamlined and get one set of rules across federally, we're going to keep seeing a lot of these types of disconnects and things that make you scratch your head and go, huh, didn't anybody think this through before they did this?
Yeah, I agree completely. And yeah, I just think it'll be exciting to see, and I'm hopeful that it maybe sets a precedent for other industries that have this same level of challenge associated with it. All right. Do you have another article we can talk about, Jack?
Sure do. And this article I don't think is going to come as a surprise to anybody, but restaurant workers has probably always had a high churn, but they talk about how restaurant workers are quitting like crazy and the churn is higher than ever before, which in an era where people are, there's job shortages in a lot of other higher paying industries. I would think it's going to be particularly hard to staff people in the restaurant industry. We've had some of the discussions on here before. I mean, it's not uncommon to see a McDonald's that closes at 7:00 or at a minimum closes its lobby at 7:00 because they don't have enough staff, to work the dining room or even take orders at the drive-through. There's McDonald's in popular, very populated areas here that they close at 7:00 because they just don't have the staff to work beyond that. So this is I'm not sure what the fix for this is. Will paying higher wages retain more restaurant workers? I don't know if you guys have noticed it out there, but we've certainly noticed it here. The cost of a restaurant meal is a little bit more than it used to be maybe a year or two ago. So somewhere in there, maybe they're going to have to start paying these people more to retain some, to maintain a certain staff. But we talked about it before with the travel industry when 90% of them got let go, and there's a shortage of people in the travel industry wanting to come back if they've gone on to another career. Same thing with restaurants, right? If the economy closed down and that restaurant was shut down 3 or 4 months, and those people sought other employment, which in probably all likelihood probably pays better than that restaurant industry, why on earth are they going to want to go back to it? So I think people see a lot of opportunity in the economy, which makes which a lot of these restaurant jobs are entry level. I think it makes it appealing for people to bolt and go and take a shot in another industry and try and make some more money. What do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I mean, on that last point, I think that's right on. There's not a lot of switching costs, right? I mean, if you're a server at a restaurant and you don't think you're getting paid as much as you could, and there's openings at another restaurant across town, I mean, yeah, it doesn't strike me that there's a ton of switching costs for you to do that. For the in this market, so I think that is, if you're in the restaurant business, you have been doing and you're doing everything you can to take care of your people and think about how do you do more with less, and perhaps you run with a smaller crew, but you pay that crew more than you have in the past. I think that might be part of the overall strategy that you have to look at. And Jack is out of the Ohio area, and he asked, are we seeing a similar squeeze in the service area and with restaurants here? and where we are in the Portland metro, Charlie and I, and I would say we definitely are. It is the irony of that things are opening up, and there aren't government regulations here in Oregon minimizing the amount of seating available for restaurants at this point, but staffing is actually minimizing. I told this story last week, and I think in last week's podcast, that I went into a restaurant that told us, well, we'd have to wait 45 minutes if we wanted to be seated inside where they actually have servers, or they could take our order and we could basically serve ourselves and their tables outside. And that's how they were dealing with that kind of capacity issues. So I think that is system wide. We are the economy and our society is feeling the squeeze of not enough people, not enough labor in those jobs for what we're used to and for the demand that's out there at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'll just kind of second it a little bit and say I've seen the food price increase as well. I felt that, and it's been frustrating. I do think that for this problem of labor shortages, I mean, you have to increase wages. I think that's basic supply and demand, and that's going to then lead to higher prices, and that might lead to less people eating out. But to me, that's just, that's obsolescence of an industry that maybe didn't need to exist, not to the full scale, because obviously people are still going to eat out. But I mean, if certain restaurants don't make sense anymore because the relationship between what they pay their employees and what it costs to eat there doesn't make sense, then, to me, that is just us evolving as a group. And it's like, yeah, if we want to have really high paid people, then some restaurants aren't going to make as much sense as they used to. And so I just think it's part of the ever-changing landscape of this whole coronavirus that we're going through. And I think as we open back up, we'll see that play out in a bunch of different restaurants. And so, yeah, I'm not sure I have anything else to add on it, but it seems like you've got to do that. You've got to have increased wages if you can't keep it staffed.
It was interesting here. A couple of weeks ago, we were out with a group of people, and somebody ordered a couple dozen chicken wings to go, and it was $32 for 2 dozen wings, which I'm not sure what Portland prices are, but that's probably about twice what it would have seemed like it would have been a year ago. And it was interesting because I remember at the time, we had the cyber attack on the pipeline, but then a few weeks later, we had another cyber attack on a meat packing plant, and they said it was going to affect the price of wings. Well, bingo, there you go. Got a lot of moving parts going on here. You got to keep up to date with things. But the restaurant industry's probably never been easy to be a restaurateur, and probably today it's probably harder than ever.
All right, everybody, that's been our show. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. This has been the None of Our Business's YouTube show and podcast. Please tune in again next week for more business updates from an accountant's perspective, and also check out our sister podcast, Profitless on Purpose, where they discuss everything relating to the nonprofit space. Thanks, everybody.